Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
He really thought distance would fix it. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a she was the love of his life way either. Just in the quiet, emotionally immature way people convince themselves they can outweigh feelings. So he stopped replying as fast, started staying busy longer, turned everything into logistics. Work, gym, noise, podcasts in the car so he didn't have to hear his own thoughts. And for a while, it almost worked, until one completely ordinary night ruined the whole illusion. He was driving home too late, half awake at a red light, when he heard someone laugh outside his window. Not her, but close enough that his body reacted before his mind did. And that was the terrifying part, because he realized something then that he would never admit out loud. He hadn't moved on. He had just been distracting himself efficiently. And once that realization cracks open, it starts leaking into everything. The empty side of the bed, the messages he typed and erased, the weird anger he felt when she seemed okay without him, the way he kept checking her profile like he was looking for evidence of something he couldn't even name. This isn't a story about a man suddenly awakening into wisdom. Honestly, sometimes he acts avoidant, sometimes selfish, sometimes emotionally honest for 3 minutes, and then disappears again. This is about what happens when someone realizes too late that the connection affected them more than their ego was prepared to admit. And the worst part of him still wanted to run, even while missing her. He kept using the word space like it was something thoughtful, measured, healthy, temporary. I just need some space. That was the sentence. Clean, mature sounding, calm enough that nobody could really argue with it. And technically, it wasn't a lie. He did need space, just not for the reasons he implied. Because when most people hear the word space, they imagine someone overwhelmed, trying to regroup emotionally. What he actually meant was, I can feel myself getting attached and it's making me uncomfortable. But that version sounded uglier, smaller somehow. So instead he said things like, I've just had a lot on my mind lately. I think I need to focus on myself. I don't want to drag you into my stress. And the frustrating part is part of him genuinely believed those explanations while he was saying them. That's the thing about emotional avoidance. It rarely feels manipulative from the inside. Sometimes it just feels like survival. He wasn't sitting there plotting distance. He wasn't trying to become emotionally unavailable on purpose. Actually, some nights he hated himself for it, especially after good moments. That was the confusing part. You'd think distance would happen after conflict, after incompatibility, after disappointment. But no. Sometimes he pulled away most intensely after intimacy, after nights that felt too real. After moments where she looked at him a little too softly, a little too directly, like she could see beneath the performance he'd spent years perfecting. And honestly, that terrified him more than losing her did at the time. He noticed it first in tiny moments, the way he'd suddenly become quieter after emotional conversations, how he'd reach for his phone the second things became vulnerable. Not even because he had notifications, just reflex, an exit strategy disguised as distraction. She noticed too, not immediately, but eventually. There was one night, stupidly ordinary, which is probably why he remembers it so clearly now, where they were sitting in her kitchen eating takeout that had already gone cold because they got distracted talking. The window was cracked open. Rain outside. One of those soft late-night city sounds humming in the background. And she asked him something simple. Not dramatic, Not where is this going? Not do you love me? Nothing that direct. She just asked, why do you disappear emotionally after we get close? And he laughed a little. Not because it was funny, because his body panicked before his mind caught up. That nervous little laugh people do when they suddenly feel cornered emotionally. I don't disappear. You do. I've just been stressed. And there it was again. Stress. Work. Timing. Pressure. Always some practical explanation ready before the honest one could form. But the truth was harder to say out loud because it made him sound emotionally childish. Part of him liked closeness. Needed it even. The other part immediately started looking for exits once it became real. Not because she was too much. Actually, she was disturbingly easy to be around. That was the problem. With other people, he could perform. Stay surface level. Keep things flirtatious, detached, manageable. But with her, conversations kept slipping past his defenses accidentally. She'd ask normal questions, and somehow he'd end up talking about things he usually buried under sarcasm or exhaustion. And afterward, he'd feel exposed. Not relieved. Exposed. Like someone had opened a door inside him he hadn't agreed to unlock yet. So, after moments of connection, he'd compensate. Take longer to reply. Become overly logical. Act distracted. Suddenly need alone time. It wasn't calculated cruelty. It was emotional recoil, which honestly doesn't hurt the other person any less. That's another uncomfortable truth people avoid admitting. You can unintentionally wound someone and still be responsible for the wound. He understands that now, or at least partially. Back then, though, he mostly just felt confused. Because he did miss her when she wasn't around. Sometimes immediately. He'd leave her apartment feeling emotionally full 1 second, then weirdly trapped the next. Like his nervous system couldn't tolerate sustained intimacy without creating distance to regulate itself. Of course, he didn't think about it in those terms back then. Back then, it just felt like, I need to breathe. So he'd go quiet for a day. Then 2. Then he'd convince himself he was protecting his independence. Meanwhile, he was checking her messages the second they came through, reading them too fast, waiting before responding so he wouldn't seem too invested, which is embarrassing to admit when you say it out loud. How many adult relationships quietly collapse under these weird little ego negotiations, pretending not to care while caring intensely. Delaying responses while staring at the phone anyway. Wanting reassurance, but resenting the need for it. Human beings are exhausting sometimes, especially emotionally guarded ones. And she felt the inconsistency. Of course she did. People always know more than avoidant partners hope they know. She noticed how affectionate he became right before pulling away again. How emotionally open moments were often followed by distance. 1 minute he'd hold her like he never wanted to leave. The next he'd seem mentally somewhere else entirely. It started affecting the atmosphere between them. Tiny hesitations appeared. Small pauses. Moments where she'd almost say something and stop herself. And he noticed those too. But instead of leaning in, he started feeling pressure. Not because she demanded perfection, because he could feel her adjusting around him. That quiet sadness people develop when they're trying not to ask for too much. There was another night he thinks about more than he admits. They were lying in bed, TV still on, neither really watching it. She was half asleep against his chest when she said quietly, "You know, you don't have to disappear every time you feel something, right?" And he remembers going completely still. Not externally, maybe, but internally. Because something about the sentence irritated him instantly. Not at her, at himself. The irritation came from recognition. which is dangerous. Sometimes people think emotional defensiveness always looks aggressive. A lot of the time it looks like withdrawal, silence, changing the subject, suddenly feeling tired, suddenly needing air. He kissed her forehead after she said it, but he didn't answer, and she didn't push. That somehow made it worse, because she wasn't trying to control him. She wasn't cornering him emotionally. She was just noticing reality, and reality becomes difficult to avoid once another person says it out loud. So what did he do? He became busier. That's usually where emotionally overwhelmed men hide first. Productivity. Work suddenly became incredibly important. Errands multiplied. The gym became sacred. Phone calls got shorter. He started framing emotional distance as personal discipline, which sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it felt convincing. He told himself, I just need balance. But balance shouldn't feel like emotional starvation. Deep down, he knew something else too. Something he couldn't fully admit yet. Her presence affected him in a way that disrupted his emotional control. That's really what scared him. Not love itself. Loss of control. Because once someone can genuinely affect your emotional state, your routines change. Your body changes. You check your phone differently, sleep differently, think differently. You start mentally including another person in your life automatically. And if you've spent years surviving through emotional self-containment, that level of attachment can feel terrifying, especially for someone who associates vulnerability with dependency. So he called it space. Space sounded reasonable. Space sounded temporary. Space sounded less pathetic than, I think I'm becoming emotionally attached, and I don't know how to handle the amount of access you suddenly have to me. He never said that part out loud. Not then. Instead, he became quieter, harder to reach, emotionally inconsistent in ways he justified internally, but couldn't fully explain. And the strange thing is, part of him genuinely expected her to understand anyway. That's the contradiction nobody really talks about. Emotionally avoidant people often want unconditional understanding while simultaneously withholding emotional clarity. They want someone to stay without fully letting them in. And eventually, that imbalance creates grief on both sides. Though he wouldn't fully understand that until much later. Back then, he still thought distance would help him regain control of himself. What he didn't realize yet was that emotional suppression has a delayed effect. Feelings don't disappear just because you stop expressing them. Sometimes they wait quietly underneath everything, until one random night, one memory, one silence too long, and suddenly the entire emotional reality you postponed comes back all at once. At first, he thought he was doing well. That's the dangerous stage. The emotionally numb stage that masquerades as progress. He started replying less, stopped checking her page as much, muted the conversation once, then unmuted it 3 hours later because the silence made him anxious in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. But outwardly, he looked fine, went to work, answered emails, made jokes, lifted heavier at the gym like physical exhaustion could replace emotional processing. And honestly, part of him felt relieved at first. Relieved the intensity had calmed down. Relieved he could think again without constantly wondering how she felt. Relieved he didn't have to manage the vulnerability that came with being emotionally seen by someone. He mistook emotional suppression for peace. A lot of people do. Because numbness is quiet. Real grief usually isn't. The strange part was how quickly his body started betraying him anyway. Little things first. He'd wake up reaching for his phone before his eyes were fully open. Not consciously. Just automatic. like his nervous system still expected her to exist in his mornings. Then the realization would hit. Oh, right. And he tossed the phone back onto the bed to quickly, irritated at himself for caring. That irritation became familiar. Not sadness. Not yet. Just this low-grade internal annoyance every time his emotions exposed themselves before he could control them. One afternoon, he was standing in line at a coffee shop when he heard someone behind him say a phrase she used to say all the time. Same tone, same sarcastic rhythm. His entire body reacted instantly. Chest tight, head turning before he could stop it. And when he realized it wasn't her, the embarrassment hit almost immediately afterward. Not because anyone noticed, because he noticed. That involuntary hope, that microscopic surge of adrenaline, it bothered him for the rest of the day. He kept replaying it internally while pretending to focus on other things. Why did my body react like that? Because bodies remember emotional attachment long after the ego starts rewriting the story. That's the part nobody prepares you for. You can intellectually decide someone matters less now. You can say things like, "It's probably for the best. We both needed distance. It wasn't sustainable." Meanwhile, your nervous system is still scanning crowded rooms for them automatically, still associating comfort with their voice, still waiting for familiar patterns. The body is humiliatingly honest sometimes. He started sleeping worse too. Not dramatically, just subtly enough to destabilize everything. Falling asleep wasn't the problem. It was the waking up at strange hours afterward. 3:17 a.m., 4:42 a.m., that disoriented feeling where your chest already feels heavy before your brain catches up to why. And during those half-awake moments, memories became dangerous. Not big memories either. Tiny ones. The way she used to steal fries off his plate while insisting she wasn't hungry. How she'd pause movies to talk about completely unrelated things. The look on her face whenever he got emotionally quiet and she was trying to decide whether to ask what was wrong or leave him alone. He remembered stupid details now. The chipped mug in her apartment. The smell of her shampoo on his hoodie weeks later. The exact way she said drive safe like she genuinely meant it every time. Why do small memories hurt more than dramatic ones sometimes? Maybe because they prove intimacy existed in ordinary places too. Not just in declarations. In routine. And routine is harder to replace. That realization started leaking into random parts of his life. He'd reach for his phone to send her something before remembering he shouldn't. A meme, a song, a photo of something oddly specific she would have laughed at. And every time it happened, there was this awkward emotional whiplash. Impulse, memory, absence, over and over. One night, he even typed out a message without fully deciding to. It wasn't deep, just, "You'd make fun of this," attached to some ridiculous sign he saw while driving home. His thumb hovered over the send button longer than he wants to admit. Then came the internal argument. Don't do this. Why not? Because you wanted space. It's just a message. That's how it starts. Starts what? Don't pretend you don't know. Delete. Phone locked. Conversation gone. But the feeling stayed. That's the exhausting part. People think emotional suppression removes emotion. Usually, it just relocates it. Into the body. Into insomnia. Into random emotional reactions that make no logical sense at convenient times. And he was becoming increasingly aware of how often he was performing indifference rather than actually feeling it. That realization made him uncomfortable. Because performance requires awareness. Meaning some part of him already knew the truth before he consciously admitted it. There was another moment he never told anyone about. He was driving home late after work, exhausted, half distracted, when he passed a restaurant they used to go to sometimes. Nothing fancy, actually kind of mediocre. But she loved this one specific dessert there and always forced him to try it even though he pretended not to care about desserts. And suddenly, he could hear her laugh in his head so clearly it physically hurt. Not metaphorically. His throat tightened, hands tense on the steering wheel. He actually switched lanes abruptly because he felt overwhelmed by how fast the memory arrived. That scared him a little. Not the memory itself, the lack of control. Because now he was realizing something important. He hadn't actually processed the loss of connection. He'd only interrupted access to it. Huge difference. One is healing. The other is emotional procrastination. And emotionally procrastinated feelings collect interest. He started becoming moodier after that. Quieter around friends. More emotionally reactive in strange ways. Someone at work asked if he was okay one afternoon, and he answered too quickly. Yeah, why? That defensive little why people use when they feel accidentally perceived. The co-worker shrugged it off immediately. But his heart kept racing afterward anyway. That's another weird thing grief does. It makes ordinary interactions feel exposing. Because part of you is constantly trying to contain something emotional beneath the surface. And containment takes energy. A lot of it. Eventually, the exhaustion started showing up physically. Messier apartment. Random headaches. Periods of emotional numbness interrupted by sudden intensity. One Saturday, he cleaned his entire kitchen at midnight for no reason. Counters. Cabinets. Fridge. Aggressively cleaning while replaying conversations in his head. Because sometimes emotional overwhelm looks weirdly productive. And the whole time, he kept mentally circling the same uncomfortable realization. Why do I miss her more now that she's giving me the distance I asked for? That contradiction haunted him. Because when she was emotionally present, part of him felt pressured. Now that she was gone, the silence felt unbearable. Human beings are complicated in deeply inconvenient ways, especially people who associate intimacy with emotional risk. At some point, he opened her profile again. Not intentionally at first. That's what he told himself. He was just curious. Just checking. Just seeing how she was doing. But emotionally, no. He was looking for evidence. Evidence she missed him. Evidence she didn't. Evidence she was hurting. Evidence she moved on too quickly. Anything that would stabilize the emotional confusion somehow. And when he saw a new photo of her smiling with friends, something oddly twisted in his chest immediately. Not anger exactly. Something more embarrassing. Displacement. Because part of him had unconsciously imagined her frozen emotionally where he left her. Seeing her continue existing without him created emotional static inside his head. Then came guilt for feeling that way. Then defensiveness about the guilt. Then emotional exhaustion from the entire cycle. It never ended cleanly. That's what people don't understand about emotional avoidance. The avoidant behavior itself is often short-term relief followed by long-term emotional haunting. And late at night, when distractions stopped working and the apartment got too quiet, he started having thoughts he didn't know what to do with. Maybe I did care more than I admitted. Maybe I only felt safe because I assumed she'd stay emotionally available no matter how inconsistent I became. Maybe silence was in clarity. Maybe I just panicked when things became real. But even then, even with all those realizations beginning to surface, part of him still wanted to run from the feelings instead of face them fully. That's the contradiction. Awareness doesn't immediately create emotional maturity. Sometimes people recognize exactly what they're doing while continuing to do it anyway. And honestly, That might be one of the most painfully human parts of this entire story. He expected missing her to feel dramatic. That's what movies teach people. Rainstorms, drunken phone calls, staring at old photos while sad music plays in the background. But real missing is usually quieter than that. More humiliating too. It sneaks into completely ordinary moments and ruins them from the inside. And honestly, that's what started happening to him. Not constantly, which somehow made it worse, because the unpredictability kept catching him off guard. One minute he'd feel completely fine, functional, detached even. Then suddenly he'd be standing in the grocery store staring at the brand of tea she always bought, feeling this weird pressure in his chest that made no rational sense. And the annoying part, he didn't even like the tea. But now his brain had attached her to it permanently. That's the problem with emotional intimacy. People start living inside your routines without asking permission. He noticed it more at night, especially during the small transitional moments people don't talk about enough. Coming home, taking off shoes, plugging the phone in, microwaving leftovers. Those tiny empty spaces in the day where another person used to exist naturally. That's where absence becomes physical somehow. Not philosophical. Physical. One night, he opened his fridge and saw leftover takeout containers sitting there too long because he'd lost motivation to cook properly again. And immediately he remembered how she used to quietly reorganize his fridge whenever she came over. Not in a controlling way. More like she cared whether he was taking care of himself. She'd throw away expired stuff while talking about something completely unrelated, half teasing him the entire time. You're one unopened yogurt away from becoming a biohazard. And he'd roll his eyes dramatically while secretly liking the domesticity of it. Back then, he barely acknowledged those moments emotionally. Now, they replayed in his head with unbearable clarity. That's another cruel thing about emotional distance. Sometimes you only recognize tenderness after it's no longer accessible. He started catching himself doing strange things too. Little unconscious behaviors. Reaching for his phone anytime something mildly funny happened. Mentally saving stories to tell her before remembering he couldn't anymore. And every single time, there was this awkward emotional drop afterward. Like missing a stare in the dark. Tiny, but enough to jolt your whole body. One afternoon, he saw a dog that looked exactly like the one she used to stop and pet every time they passed it on her street. Without thinking, he actually pulled out his phone to take a picture. Then halfway through unlocking it, he froze. Oh, that stupid little O. That moment when reality reintroduces itself. You're not talking like that anymore. You don't automatically belong in each other's day now. He stood there for a second longer than necessary, pretending to check notifications so nobody around him would notice the sudden shift in his face. Then he put the phone away and kept walking. But internally, his whole mood changed. And he hated how fragile that made him feel. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. He was the one who asked for distance. The one who needed space. The one who acted overwhelmed by emotional closeness. So why did ordinary life suddenly feel haunted by her? That question kept irritating him. Not emotionally at first. Mentally. Like he was trying to solve himself logically. Maybe I'm just lonely. Maybe I miss the routine. Maybe I'm idealizing things now that they're gone. And to be fair, part of that was probably true. But not all of it. Deep down, he knew the difference between missing attention and missing someone specifically. This was specific. Painfully specific. He missed the way she listened without rushing him. The way she noticed shifts in his mood before he verbalized them. The weirdly calming effect of her sitting quietly beside him while both of them did separate things. Intimacy isn't always intensity. Sometimes it's just someone making your nervous system feel less alone. And unfortunately for him, his body had memorized that feeling before his mind decided whether it was safe. That's what made moving on messy. Because intellectually, he still kept trying to minimize the connection. Meanwhile, emotionally, he was replaying microscopic moments like they were evidence in a trial. The time she fell asleep during a movie and denied it afterward. The way she used to say his name differently when she was worried about him. How she'd lightly touch his arm during conversations without seeming aware she was doing it. Ridiculous details. Embarrassingly tender details. And the worst part was how often these memories appeared during completely unremarkable moments. Driving, laundry, waiting at red lights. Especially driving. Something about nighttime driving became dangerous after her. Too much silence. Too much room for memory. One night, he was stopped at an intersection when a song came on that she used to sing badly on purpose just to annoy him. He actually laughed instinctively before the grief hit. That combination is brutal, by the way. Laughing and hurting simultaneously. It creates this emotional confusion that's difficult to explain unless you've lived it. Because for 1 second the person feels alive again. Then reality returns immediately afterward. He turned the song off halfway through, then turned it back on 30 seconds later because the silence felt worse. That became a pattern too. Avoidance. Return. Avoidance again. He couldn't fully tolerate the feelings, but he also couldn't completely let them go. There was another moment he never admitted to anyone. He woke up from a dream about her one morning and reached across the bed before he was fully conscious. Just instinct. And when his hand touched cold sheets instead of another person, his stomach dropped so hard it actually made him sit up. The room felt strangely unfamiliar for a few seconds afterward. That disoriented loneliness of her emotional attachment gets interrupted. He sat there rubbing his face, annoyed with himself immediately. This is getting ridiculous. But the thing about grief is that it doesn't care whether you think it's reasonable. It just keeps surfacing wherever emotional truth was delayed. And his truth had been delayed for a long time. Not because he didn't feel deeply, because he was afraid of how deeply he felt. That distinction matters. A lot of emotionally avoidant people are emotionally empty. If anything, sometimes they feel too much. That's why they compartmentalize so aggressively. Why they disappear after intimacy. Why they suddenly become practical when emotions appear. Why they convince themselves independence is the same thing as emotional control. But suppressed attachment eventually leaks through behavior anyway. And his behavior was becoming increasingly obvious to himself now. Checking her social media late at night. Typing messages he never sent. Replaying conversations, trying to figure out where exactly he started emotionally retreating. There were moments he almost convinced himself to reach out. Not dramatically, usually through something casual. A song, a joke, a random excuse. But every time he got close, another voice interrupted. Leave her alone. You wanted distance. Don't confuse her again. Then why do I miss her this much? Because you waited too long to admit what she meant to you. That thought hit harder every time it surfaced. Because he started realizing something uncomfortable. He had experienced the relationship while emotionally half defended, which meant she probably felt the full emotional weight of things while he kept buffering himself from it in real time. And now the buffering was gone. Now the feelings were catching up all at once. That delayed grief changed the texture of everything around him. Even his apartment felt different. Too quiet. Too still. He started leaving the TV on in the background just to create noise. Not because he was paying attention, because silence started sounding emotional. And in those quiet hours, he began recognizing a truth he'd spent months avoiding. He didn't just miss having someone. He missed her specifically. Her voice, her timing, her presence, the strange emotional safety he only appreciated fully once it disappeared. And maybe the most painfully human part of all this was that he still wasn't completely ready to admit it out loud yet, even to himself, especially to himself. The confusing part wasn't that he missed her. Eventually, he had to admit that. No, the confusing part was how often the missing came packaged with irritation. Not at her exactly, at the situation, at himself, at the fact that another person still had this much emotional access to him even after distance. Because part of him genuinely wanted closeness, and another part reacted to closeness like it was a threat to his internal stability. That contradiction exhausted him. Some days he'd miss her so intensely it felt physical. Other days he'd convince himself reconnecting would only create pressure again. And the frustrating thing was both feelings were real. That's what emotionally conflicted people rarely know how to explain properly. Contradictory emotions can coexist. He could crave intimacy while feeling trapped by it, miss her deeply while resenting how emotionally affected he still was, want her near him while instinctively pulling away the second things became emotionally vulnerable again. None of it felt clean, or wise, or spiritually evolved. Mostly it felt embarrassing, especially because he couldn't fully explain his own reactions. There was one night he almost called her, not because something dramatic happened. Actually, that's what made it worse. Nothing happened. He had a long, exhausting day at work, came home irritated for no clear reason, threw his keys onto the counter too hard, and suddenly the apartment felt unbearable. Too quiet, too empty in a strangely specific way. So he paced for a while pretending he needed to clean. Opened cabinets, closed them again, started laundry at midnight like that somehow counted as emotional regulation. Then he grabbed his phone. Her contact was still pinned near the top. He stared at it longer than necessary, and immediately the internal argument started. Don't. Why? Because this is loneliness talking. What if it isn't? You already complicated things enough. I just want to hear her voice. That's exactly the problem. He locked the phone, walked to the kitchen, and locked it again 2 minutes later. That restless, emotional back and forth became familiar after her. Move toward, pull away, miss her, resent missing her, repeat. He hated how emotionally unstable it made him feel internally, while externally he still looked relatively composed. That's another strange thing about emotional conflict. Sometimes nobody around you notices how chaotic it actually feels inside your head. To everyone else, he was functioning. Meanwhile, internally, he was replaying tiny interactions like unresolved emergencies, especially moments where she loved him gently. Those memories became increasingly difficult to sit with, not because they were painful by themselves, because they exposed how defensive he'd been in response to softness. There was one memory that kept resurfacing against his will. They were grocery shopping together late one evening. Nothing emotional happening. Nothing serious. She was standing in front of the freezer section arguing passionately about ice cream flavors like it was somehow morally important. And he remembered just watching her talk. Not even participating anymore. Just watching. Because there was this brief moment where he realized he felt weirdly peaceful around her. Safe, even. And instead of relaxing into that feeling, his brain immediately started calculating future risk. That's how deep emotional self-protection can run sometimes. A person can experience tenderness and immediately start preparing for loss. He remembers becoming quieter afterward that night, subtly distant, and she noticed. Of course she did. You okay? Yeah, just tired. Always tired. That was one of his favorite emotional hiding places. Stress, fatigue, work. Practical explanations feel safer than vulnerable ones. Because saying, "I think I'm getting emotionally attached and it scares me," feels unbearably exposing when you're used to self-containment. So instead he'd withdraw slightly and expect her not to notice the emotional shift. But she usually did. Not aggressively. That almost made it harder. If she had been dramatic about it, maybe he could have defended himself more easily. Instead, she often just looked quietly disappointed. And disappointment is difficult to argue with when you know part of it is justified. That's when resentment started appearing in strange ways. Not explosive resentment. Subtle resentment. He'd feel irritated when she asked emotionally direct questions, then miss those questions once they stopped. Feel overwhelmed when she wanted closeness, then feel hollow when she emotionally stepped back. At one point, he actually caught himself feeling annoyed that she seemed calmer without him. That realization made him feel awful immediately afterward. Because what did he expect? He asked for space, created inconsistency, pulled away emotionally, but some unconscious part of him still wanted proof that she remained emotionally attached. Not because he wanted to hurt her, because emotionally conflicted people often seek reassurance while resisting responsibility for the intimacy itself, which creates incredibly painful dynamics, especially for the other person. And deep down, he knew that. Not fully, but enough to feel guilty in quiet moments. One night, he was lying in bed scrolling aimlessly when he saw a photo someone posted of her. Nothing dramatic. She was just smiling. Normal smile. Normal night out. Normal life continuing. But something inside him tightened instantly, and his first reaction wasn't sadness. It was defensiveness. See, she's fine. She doesn't need you. This proves everything was less serious than you thought. But beneath the defensive logic was another feeling entirely. Displacement. Because emotionally, he had unconsciously imagined himself still occupying some important emotional space in her life, even while distancing himself. That contradiction is hard to admit out loud. Some people want emotional access without emotional accountability. And when that access begins disappearing, panic quietly starts underneath the ego. He put the phone face down afterward and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then eventually, do you actually miss her? Or do you just miss being emotionally significant to someone? That question landed harder than he expected, because he knew the answer immediately. It was her. Specifically her. Not generic affection. Not attention. Her timing. Her voice. Her strange ability to soften him without forcing anything. And maybe that's what frustrated him most. She made him feel emotionally close in a way he secretly wanted, and simultaneously didn't know how to sustain. There were moments where he almost blamed her internally for how exposed he felt. Not rationally, emotionally. Like some part of him associated vulnerability itself with danger. So after closeness, his nervous system would search for distance automatically. Not because she harmed him, because intimacy activated fears he normally kept buried under independence and routine. And unfortunately, he didn't understand that while the relationship was happening, he only started recognizing it afterward, when the silence gave him enough room to hear his own patterns clearly. That clarity was uncomfortable, because now memories started rearranging themselves differently. Moments he previously framed as needing space suddenly looked more like fear. Moments he labeled pressure now felt more like emotional exposure. And the worst realization of all, part of him genuinely wanted the emotional safety she offered while simultaneously punishing her for how much he needed it. That thought stayed with him for weeks, especially late at night, especially during those exhausted emotional hours where honesty becomes harder to avoid. There were nights he mentally rehearsed conversations with her, imaginary ones. I didn't know how to handle this. You made me feel too much. No, that sounds manipulative. Okay, then I think I got scared. Scared of what? Being known. And even internally, the admission felt uncomfortable. Because emotionally avoidant people often pride themselves on self-sufficiency. They build identities around needing less, feeling less, managing alone, until someone enters their life and quietly disrupts that entire structure without even trying. And instead of surrendering to the connection peacefully, sometimes they fight it. Sometimes they sabotage it slowly. Sometimes they create distance while secretly hoping the other person will stay close anyway. Sometimes they become colder exactly when they feel the most emotionally vulnerable. Not because the feelings aren't real, because they are. That's the tragedy underneath all this. The depth of feeling was never actually the problem. His inability to stay emotionally present inside those feelings was. And by the time he started understanding that, the silence between them had already grown teeth. At first, silence felt like relief. That's the part he doesn't say out loud very often, because it sounds wrong when you say it like that, like he didn't care. But it wasn't that he didn't care. It was more like the emotional pressure had finally dropped. No waiting for replies. No interpreting tone. No trying to regulate himself around someone else's presence in his head all day. Just quiet. Clean quiet. The kind that almost tricks you into thinking you've solved something. For a while, he even convinced himself it was better this way. Less complicated. Less emotional noise. More control. He started building routines around that silence. Gym. Work. Late night scrolling. Random productivity bursts that felt oddly urgent, like he needed to prove to himself he was still functioning properly. But silence doesn't stay neutral for long. It starts changing shape depending on what you avoided inside it. And for him, it slowly became something else. Something heavier. At first, it was subtle. He'd sit in his apartment after work. He's dropped on the table, shoes still on for a few seconds longer than necessary, just standing there listening to nothing. No messages coming in from her. No small interruptions. No unexpected questions or voice notes. Just absence. And it wasn't dramatic. That's what made it harder to notice. It didn't crush him. It accumulated. Like dust you don't see until the light hits it at the wrong angle. He started noticing small gaps in his day where she used to exist. Not physically, structurally. Like his routine had been quietly built around micro moments of her presence without him fully realizing it. Morning messages that didn't happen anymore. Random updates about nothing important. That one habit she had of sending photos of food even when it wasn't impressive. He caught himself reaching for his phone less because he had less to share, and then realized that wasn't true. He had things to share. He just didn't have her to share them with. That distinction hit differently. One night he cooked something simple, nothing special. Just pasta, and halfway through eating he paused for no reason. Fork halfway to his mouth. Because a memory came in without warning. She used to sit across from him sometimes and quietly steal bites from his plate while insisting she wasn't hungry. And he'd pretend to be annoyed, but he wasn't. Not really. He actually liked it. more than he admitted at the time. He put the fork down and stared at the food for a moment too long, then continued eating like nothing happened. That became a pattern too. Emotional interruption followed by immediate suppression. Keep going. Don't think too much. Don't let it linger. But silence is patient. It waits, and it always collects what you try to ignore. There were nights when he'd sit on his couch with the TV on just for background noise. Not watching it, just filling space. Because the apartment without her presence felt too aware of itself, too empty in a way that made thoughts louder than usual. And those thoughts weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were worse because they were ordinary. Why did she always notice when I was quiet? Why did I pull away after good moments? Why did I assume she would stay consistent even when I wasn't? He didn't always like where those questions led, so he stopped following them too far. But silence has a way of continuing the conversation without permission. It fills in the gaps you avoid. One evening he was scrolling through his phone aimlessly when he saw something that reminded him of her completely unrelated. Just a random post about something she used to joke about. And his first instinct was an emotional nostalgia. It was reach. His thumb moved before thought, then stopped. Halfway. That small hesitation felt physical, like his body and mind briefly disagreed. Send. No. Don't send. He locked the phone too quickly, then unlocked it again a minute later for no reason except habit. That cycle started repeating in smaller and smaller ways. Not reaching out, but thinking about reaching out, then stopping, then imagining what would happen if he did, and then doing nothing. The silence didn't just remove her presence. It created a space where everything unresolved started echoing. There was one night he remembers more clearly than he wants to. He was driving late, windows slightly down, cold air, empty road. One of those nights where time feels stretched and soft. A song came on randomly, something she used to play repeatedly when she was in a certain mood. Not even a meaningful song. Just one of those "this is mine right now" songs people attach themselves to temporarily. And suddenly the memory wasn't mental anymore. It was physical. Her voice overlapping with the song in his head. Her laughing at something he said in that exact same car. Her leaning her head against the window while pretending not to fall asleep. He exhaled sharply without realizing it. Not sadness exactly. More like his body recognizing something before he was emotionally ready for it. He actually turned the music down, then turned it back up a few seconds later because the silence felt worse. That contradiction again. Miss something gives a void, it gives miss it more in the absence of it. He started noticing how often his reactions were split like that, even in simple situations. Seeing a couple laughing in public, feeling annoyed, then immediately feeling guilty for being annoyed. Hearing someone say something she used to say, feeling a sudden wave of warmth, then discomfort for feeling warmth. It was like his emotional system couldn't decide whether to hold on or let go. So it did both. Constantly. At work, he functioned normally. That was the strange part. He could sit in meetings, respond to emails, make jokes when necessary. But underneath the functioning layer, there was this persistent low-level awareness of absence. Like something quietly missing from the background of his attention at all times. He didn't talk about it. Not to anyone. Because how do you explain missing someone in a way that doesn't sound like weakness or overreaction? So he just carried it. Privately. Quietly. And it started leaking into unexpected places. He became more easily irritated. Not at people specifically. At small inconveniences. Traffic felt heavier. Waiting felt longer. Silence between tasks felt uncomfortable. It wasn't really about those things. It was about internal pressure with nowhere to go. One night, he caught himself cleaning his apartment aggressively for no reason. Not organizing. Cleaning like something needed to be controlled. Wiping surfaces twice. Rearranging objects that were already fine. Taking out trash that wasn't full. And halfway through, he paused. Standing in the middle of the room. Sweaty. Tired. Suddenly aware of what he was doing. It wasn't about cleanliness. It was about emotional overflow. And that realization made him stop for a moment. Just stand there, listening to the silence again. This time without distraction. And it felt different. Not peaceful. Not healing. Just loud in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. Because silence doesn't just remove external noise. It amplifies internal ones. And underneath all his routines, distractions, and controlled distance, there was still something unresolved sitting there. Still active. Still unfinished. He sat down on the couch after that. Didn't turn the TV on immediately. Just sat, phone in hand, and locked. Her name still existing in his contact list like a decision he kept postponing. And for the first time in a while, he didn't feel confusion. He felt recognition, not clarity. Something more uncomfortable than that. Recognition that nothing about this had actually disappeared. It had just stopped being spoken. And silence, he realized slowly, is not the absence of emotion. It's just where emotion goes when it's not allowed anywhere else. He would have denied it at first. If you had asked him directly, he would have said no. No, he wasn't checking. No, he wasn't looking. No, he wasn't thinking about her like that anymore. And technically, that was the version of the truth he was comfortable presenting. But there are behaviors that don't need verbal confirmation. They just repeat. Quietly. Without permission. It started late at night. That's usually how these things begin. Not in emotional declarations. Not in dramatic realizations. But in small, half-conscious phone habits. He'd pick up his phone without intention, and lock it, and sit there for a second without knowing what he was going to do. Then muscle memory would take over. Her profile. Just for a second. Just to see. Just to confirm something he couldn't clearly name. Sometimes he didn't even scroll. Sometimes it was enough just to open it. That alone would create a strange internal shift. Not relief. Not pain. Something in between. A tightening in the chest followed by immediate rationalization. I was just curious. I'm just checking how she's doing. I don't even care that much. But his body would disagree with him quietly. Because there was always a micro-reaction. A pause. A stillness. A tiny emotional drop that he tried not to notice. And then he'd close it quickly. Too quickly. Like catching himself doing something embarrassing. Then lock the phone and put it face down like that would reset the emotional state. It never did. He started noticing patterns in himself that he didn't like naming. For example, he never checked when he was busy, only when things were quiet, only when there was nothing else occupying his attention fully enough to suppress the impulse. That alone told him more than he wanted to admit, because it meant the behavior wasn't accidental. It was situational, a response to absence, not curiosity. Absence. There were moments during the day when it hit him differently, not constantly, just randomly, while waiting for coffee, while walking somewhere without thinking, while hearing someone laugh in a way that almost sounded like her. That almost was dangerous, because it created a mental overlap. His brain would briefly try to replace the present with memory, and for a second, he would forget where he was emotionally. Then reality would catch up, and he'd feel that strange internal correction. Oh, right. She's not part of this anymore. That realization didn't always hurt. Sometimes it just created a blankness, a pause in thought that lingered a little too long, and then he'd keep moving, like nothing happened. But internally, something had shifted slightly out of alignment. He started doing something he didn't fully notice at first, rewriting conversations in his head, not the actual conversations, the ones he never had, the ones he wished he had said differently. He would lie in bed and replay moments where he withdrew emotionally, and then imagine alternative versions where he didn't, where he stayed present, where he answered honestly, where he didn't retreat after intimacy. And in those imagined versions, things felt different. Softer, less tense, more grounded, but also more vulnerable. And that was the part that made him uncomfortable, because those imagined scenarios revealed something he didn't want to fully face. He wasn't incapable of emotional presence. He was selective about it, and sometimes avoidant of it when it mattered most. There were nights he would type messages to her without sending them. Not emotional essays, just fragments. Small, harmless things that would have looked casual if anyone else saw them. Hope you're doing okay. Random thought this reminded me of you. You'd laugh at this. He would type, read it, delete it, type again, stop halfway, exit the app, and each time there was a different internal reason. It's unnecessary. It will confuse things. It's too late. It's too soon. What would even be the point? But underneath all those rational explanations, there was something simpler. Fear. Not fear of rejection. Fear of reopening something he had not fully processed. Because reaching out would mean acknowledging that it still mattered, and acknowledging that meant responsibility. Responsibility for how things ended. Responsibility for emotional inconsistency. Responsibility for the space he himself had created. It's easier to miss someone privately than to re-enter the emotional reality of them. So he stayed in that in-between space. Not fully detached. Not fully connected. Just orbiting. Quietly. There was one specific night that stayed with him longer than others. He was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical work, but from emotional accumulation. He got home, dropped his bag, didn't even turn on the lights immediately. Just stood in the dark hallway for a few seconds. And in that stillness, his phone buzzed. Not her. Obviously not her. Just a random notification. But for half a second, his body reacted anyway. That immediate anticipation response. And that reaction annoyed him more than anything, because it exposed something he didn't want to name. He was still waiting. Not consciously, but somewhere underneath everything. Still waiting for contact. Still expecting emotional continuity that no longer existed. He sat on the edge of his bed afterward, staring at nothing, phone in hand again without realizing it. And locked. Her name. Pinned. Still there. He didn't open it immediately. Just stare at it. And there was this quiet internal moment that didn't feel like thought exactly. More like awareness without language. You're still here. Not physically, but internally. Still occupying space. Still influencing reactions. Still shaping attention. And that realization wasn't romantic. It wasn't poetic. It was uncomfortable. Because it meant he hadn't actually stepped out of the emotional field he thought he had left. He had just changed his behavior around it. That's when he started noticing something else. He wasn't just checking her. He was tracking absence itself. Looking for signs of her absence being real. Or not real. checking whether she had moved on, checking whether she still existed in the same emotional category he had placed her in. It wasn't about ego exactly. It was about unresolved emotional positioning. Where do I stand in relation to her now? And the absence of an answer made him restless. There were moments he caught himself almost reaching out. Not for reconciliation, not for clarity, just contact. A small break in silence. Something to confirm that the connection hadn't completely dissolved into nothingness. But he never did, because each time another thought interrupted. If she responds normally, what does that mean? If she responds coldly, what does that mean? If she doesn't respond at all, what does that mean? Every possible outcome carried emotional consequences he wasn't ready to absorb. So he stayed silent and kept looking from a distance instead, which is its own kind of emotional continuation, one he didn't fully admit to himself. But the body knows. The body always knows, because even when he wasn't actively thinking about her, his attention still bent slightly in her direction whenever things got quiet. And that was the part he couldn't rationalize away anymore. Not fully. Not honestly. He wasn't over it. He was just learning how to hide the looking. He didn't notice it as a pattern at first. It felt more like mood shifts. Like some days he was close, and some days he just wasn't. That was the story he told himself. People get tired. People need space. People are inconsistent sometimes. It sounded reasonable enough that he didn't question it too deeply. But later, when things got quieter between them, he started seeing something he hadn't wanted to name. He only felt emotionally stable when he wasn't fully inside the connection. Not outside it. Not gone. Just half gone. That in-between state where he could still have access to her presence without fully surrendering his emotional control. It wasn't conscious. It never is. It showed up in small behaviors first, like how he'd become more affectionate after distance, or how he'd suddenly miss her intensely after a day of emotional disconnection, or how he could sit next to her, laughing, completely present for a moment, and then slowly drift away internally for no clear reason. She used to notice it. Not dramatically, just quietly. There would be moments where she'd look at him mid-conversation and pause slightly, like she was trying to recalibrate what version of him was sitting there. "Where did you go just now?" He would always answer the same way. "I'm here." But he wasn't always fully there. Not emotionally. Sometimes he was physically present, but mentally already stepping backward. It wasn't rejection. It was regulation. At least that's what he told himself later. Back then, he didn't have that language. Back then, it just felt like pressure. Too much closeness at once would make something inside him tighten. Not fear exactly. More like internal overload. Like his system didn't know how to hold sustained emotional intimacy without creating distance as a release valve. And that release valve became a habit. He'd get close, then subtly pull away, then miss her, then return again. A loop. One he didn't recognize while he was inside it. There was a specific moment he remembered later with uncomfortable clarity. They were sitting together late at night. Nothing special. The kind of silence that feels comfortable when people are aligned emotionally. She was leaning slightly against him, scrolling on her phone, occasionally showing him something without needing a reaction. He remembers feeling oddly calm. And then, almost without warning, a shift happened internally. It wasn't her. Nothing changed externally. But something in him stepped back. Like a part of him had suddenly decided the emotional closeness needed to be reduced. He started getting quieter, less responsive, less emotionally engaged. Not rude, just less available. and she noticed within minutes. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just tired." That word again. Tired. It had become his emotional exit strategy without him fully realizing it. But what he remembers most isn't her reaction. It's what he felt afterward. Relief. Not guilt. Not sadness. Relief. Because distance had returned. And that relief confused him later. Why would emotional distance feel relieving when he cared about her? That question didn't have an answer at the time. So he avoided it. Like he avoided most emotional contradictions that didn't resolve quickly. But the pattern kept repeating. Closeness gives discomfort, gives withdrawal, gives relief, gives longing, gives return. It was like his nervous system couldn't tolerate sustained emotional presence without cycling through separation. And the strangest part, he mistook that cycle for chemistry, for intensity, for something meaningful and complicated in a romantic way. But looking back, it was more like emotional instability wrapped in attraction. He didn't know how to stay, but he also didn't know how to fully leave. So he stayed partially, half invested, half detached, always adjusting distance without naming it. There were moments when she would be fully open with him emotionally, and instead of stepping closer, he'd feel an internal urge to step sideways. Not away, just sideways. Like proximity itself needed moderation. She once told him something quietly one evening that stayed with him longer than he expected. "I feel like I have to guess which version of you I'm talking to sometimes." He didn't respond immediately, not because he didn't hear her, but because something inside him didn't want to land on that sentence too quickly, because it was accurate. And accuracy in emotional situations can feel more uncomfortable than criticism. "I'm the same person," he said eventually. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't fully true. Not in the way she meant. He was consistent in identity, but not in emotional availability. That difference mattered more than he understood at the time. After that night, something subtly changed between them. Not a breakup, not a confrontation, just a soft recalibration. She became slightly more careful, less spontaneous emotionally, more observant before opening up. And he noticed that too. But instead of leaning in, he interpreted it as space, which temporarily relieved him. Because now he didn't have to manage intensity as often. But relief always has a cost. Because what he didn't realize was that she was adjusting herself around his inconsistency. And every adjustment made her a little less emotionally free. There were moments he almost felt that shift and ignored it. Not out of cruelty, out of avoidance. Because acknowledging it would have required him to sit with something uncomfortable. That he was shaping the emotional climate between them more than he was willing to admit. One night, much later, after things had already started dissolving, he was alone in his apartment thinking about this pattern. Not because he was trying to analyze it. It just surfaced, quietly, uninvited, and he realized something that made him sit still for a long time. He had felt safest in relationships when he maintained emotional distance just below the threshold of full vulnerability, close enough to feel connection, far enough to avoid being fully affected. That was the balance he had been unconsciously protecting. And she disrupted that balance. Not by doing anything wrong, but by being present in a way that didn't allow him to stay half and emotionally without consequence. She made him feel seen enough that withdrawal became noticeable. And that visibility created pressure he didn't know how to regulate. So he did what he always did. He created space. But what he didn't understand then was that space wasn't neutral. Space wasn't empty. Space accumulated emotional impact over time. And the more he relied on it, the more it reshaped the relationship quietly. until one day, the connection no longer felt like something he was inside of. It felt like something he kept stepping in and out of. And that inconsistency slowly changed everything. He didn't realize it while it was happening. Only later, when silence replaced conversation, when absence replaced presence, when his nervous system stopped receiving the emotional feedback it had been unconsciously relying on. That's when he started to understand the truth he had avoided for a long time. He didn't just fear losing people. He also feared staying too emotionally present with them. And somewhere between those two fears, he kept building distance in places where closeness was actually trying to form. He didn't notice the exact moment it happened. That's the part that bothers him when he thinks back. There wasn't a breakup conversation that felt final. No dramatic ending. No clear line where everything shifted. Just a gradual quieting. Like someone slowly turning down the volume in a room he had gotten used to hearing her in. At first, he assumed it was normal. People get busy. People have their own lives. People don't always respond immediately. So he didn't question it. Not seriously. But then something subtle started changing in the rhythm. Her messages became shorter, less immediate, less emotionally expansive. Not cold, just reduced. Where there used to be small emotional observations, there were now simple updates. Where there used to be curiosity, there was now clarity. And he told himself it was fine, even good. This is healthy, he thought. Less intensity, more balance. But underneath that rational framing, something else was reacting. Something he didn't fully admit yet. Because part of him had been relying on her emotional presence more than he understood at the time. Not in an obvious way. Not dependency in the dramatic sense. More like an emotional safety net he didn't realize was there until it stopped appearing. She used to initiate more. She used to check in, ask questions, create openings for connection even when he was quiet. And he didn't always respond with equal emotional energy. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he needed space. And she adapted around that. At first. But adaptation has a limit. There was one evening he remembers now with uncomfortable clarity. He sent a message, something casual, almost automatic. A meme, a small thought, nothing important. And then he waited, not anxiously at first, just normally. But hours passed, then a day, then longer than usual. And something in him started shifting without permission. At first, it was just confusion. She probably saw it. She's just busy. It's fine. But then came the second layer. The checking. Not dramatic checking. Just habitual. Phone unlocked without intention. Chat opened without purpose. Scrolling slightly upward as if something new might appear if he looked differently. Nothing. That nothing started becoming louder than expected. Because absence, when it becomes consistent, stops feeling neutral. It starts feeling intentional, even when it isn't. And that's when he felt the first real discomfort. Not sadness. Not yet. Discomfort. Like something in the structure of their connection had shifted without him being told. He tried to correct it internally. Maybe I should give her space too. Maybe I've been too available. Maybe this is just recalibration. But emotionally, something else was happening beneath those thoughts. He was waiting, more than he admitted. Waiting for her to return to the previous rhythm. To reinitiate. To rebalance the dynamic. To reopen the emotional thread they used to casually maintain. And when she didn't, the waiting started changing shape. It became noticing. Noticing how often he checked. Noticing how often nothing came in. Noticing how much he was thinking about something he claimed not to care about. There is a strange emotional inversion that happens when someone stops chasing you. At first, it feels like relief, less pressure, less emotional responsibility, more control. But control only feels stable when it's mutual. When it becomes one-sided silence, it starts feeling like loss disguised as space. And he began to feel that slowly, not all at once, in fragments. He would be at work and suddenly realize he hadn't heard from her in a while. Then immediately dismiss the thought, she's fine. But the body doesn't always accept dismissal so easily. There were moments when his attention would drift mid-task for no clear reason, a subtle pause and focus, like something in his system was scanning for an update that never came. And that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit, because he had been the one to ask for distance before. He had been the one to step back emotionally when things felt too close. So why did it feel different now? Why did her absence feel heavier than his own withdrawal ever did? He didn't have language for that at first, so he rationalized it. She's just less emotionally invested now. That's fine. That's what I wanted. But the truth was more complicated. He didn't just want distance. He wanted controlled distance. Distance that still kept emotional access available. He wanted space without consequence. And what he was experiencing now was consequence without control. There was a night that made it harder to ignore. He was lying in bed, phone in hand, half scrolling without purpose. And he noticed something strange. He wasn't just checking for her message. He was checking for evidence that she still cared in the same way. That she still existed emotionally in relation to him. That he still occupied a space in her attention without effort. And when nothing came, a quiet irritation started forming. Not anger at her, at the situation, at himself, at the emotional imbalance he hadn't fully acknowledged while it was happening. Because now, in hindsight, he could see it more clearly. She had been initiating. She had been reaching. She had been maintaining emotional continuity. And he had been regulating his closeness based on comfort, not consistency. And now, the system had adjusted. Naturally. Quietly. Without drama. Just withdrawal. And withdrawal, when you're not the one initiating it, feels very different. One night he saw her name appear on his screen, not a message, just a notification from something unrelated, and his body reacted before his mind did. That small internal lift. Anticipation. Then immediate correction. Oh, right. Not from her. That moment stayed with him longer than it should have, because it revealed something uncomfortable. He was still emotionally oriented toward her presence, even when she wasn't actively participating anymore. And that realization created a kind of internal friction, because part of him wanted to re-establish contact immediately, and another part felt defensive about needing to. That contradiction grew stronger over time. He would think about reaching out, then hesitate, then imagine different outcomes, then stop again. Not because he didn't care, because he cared in a way that now felt unregulated. And unregulated emotion made him cautious. Meanwhile, she continued, becoming quieter, not as a reaction he could easily track, just a steady reduction in emotional reach. And that shift changed something fundamental in the dynamic between them. He started noticing he was no longer reacting to her presence. He was reacting to her absence, which is a very different emotional position, one that feels less like connection and more like withdrawal symptoms. And that thought, when it finally formed clearly in his mind, sat with him longer than he expected, because it meant something had already shifted past the point of casual adjustment. It meant the dynamic they once had was no longer actively maintained by both sides. It meant silence wasn't temporary anymore. It was becoming structure. And for the first time, he felt something close to uncertainty. Not about her, about what he had actually lost while assuming he still had time to figure it out. It didn't arrive as one clean realization. Nothing about it did. It came in pieces, uneven, late, sometimes inconveniently honest, sometimes softened just enough for him to tolerate it. That's how truth shows up when you've spent too long avoiding it. It doesn't announce itself, it leaks in. He started noticing it in the smallest moments first. Standing in his kitchen at night, not doing anything, just staring at the counter like he had forgotten why he was there. Then suddenly a thought would appear. Not loud, almost casual. I think I heard her. And immediately after that, another voice would interrupt. You didn't mean to. Then another. But intent doesn't erase impact. He would stand there longer than necessary, holding nothing in his hands, feeling like his mind had quietly split into different versions of himself arguing in the background. One version defended him. One version questioned him. One version just stayed quiet, watching. He started realizing something uncomfortable about his memories. They weren't stable anymore. They kept changing depending on what he was willing to admit that day. A conversation where he once remembered himself as just needing space started looking different when replayed at 2 a.m. In that version, she wasn't demanding. She was just trying to understand. And he wasn't calm. He was already halfway gone emotionally, even while physically present. That distinction began to haunt him, because it meant the ending wasn't sudden. It was gradual, built moment by moment through small withdrawals he didn't fully register at the time. There were nights he couldn't sleep properly anymore. Not insomnia in the dramatic sense, just restless awareness. That state where your body is tired, but your mind refuses to fully shut down because there's something unresolved still looping underneath everything. And in that state, his thoughts became less filtered, less defended, more honest than he was comfortable with during the day. You didn't communicate clearly. You expected her to adapt. You pulled away when things got real. You called it space. You called it stress. You called it independence. But none of those words fully covered what actually happened. He would sometimes sit up in bed, rub his face, and just stare at the wall for a while after those thoughts. Not because he disagreed, because he didn't know what to do with them. At work, he functioned normally. That was the strange contrast. He could answer emails, join conversations, even laugh at the right moments. But underneath that functioning layer, something had changed. There was a low-level awareness of emotional inconsistency inside him now, like a quiet thread pulling at everything he did. Even when he wasn't actively thinking about her, she was present in a different way. Not as memory, as unfinished processing. He began noticing his own patterns more sharply. How he avoided emotional depth when it appeared too quickly. How he became slightly distant after moments of closeness. How he unconsciously created space whenever things started feeling too real. And worse, how familiar that pattern was. There were moments he tried to justify it. Maybe I just need more time alone. Maybe I'm not built for constant emotional intensity. Maybe this wasn't compatibility. But even as he formed those explanations, something inside him resisted them. Because those explanations made it sound like the relationship itself was the problem. When another part of him was starting to see a different possibility. Maybe it wasn't the connection. Maybe it was how he moved inside it. There was one memory that kept resurfacing more than others. Not dramatic, not emotional on the surface. Just a quiet moment. She had been talking about something small, something irrelevant. Really, and he remembers being physically present, but mentally drifting. Not because she was boring, but because emotional closeness was happening in a way he didn't know how to stay fully inside. And instead of grounding himself there, he stepped back internally. Just slightly. Enough that she could feel it. And she did feel it. He remembered her pause. That subtle shift in tone. "You're not here right now, are you?" And he had smiled a little too quickly. I'm just tired. Tired. That word again. It became a soft exit door he used without thinking. Now, when he recalled it, it didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt like avoidance dressed as explanation. And that was difficult to sit with, because it meant he hadn't just been overwhelmed. He had been selectively present. Present when it was easy, absent when it required emotional entrance. That realization didn't come with dramatic emotion. It came with silence. The kind that sits heavily in your chest without needing words. He started noticing how often he had relied on her emotional consistency without fully matching it. How she had held conversations open when he had started closing them. How she had asked follow-up questions when he gave short answers. How she had adjusted herself around his emotional unpredictability without making it a problem every time. And slowly, an uncomfortable thought formed. She adapted more than I did. That thought didn't feel accusatory at first. It felt factual. But facts can still carry weight, especially when they begin to point toward responsibility you weren't prepared to hold. He remembered one night where she had said something quietly that he didn't fully understand at the time. "I feel like I'm always trying to meet you where you are, but I don't always know where you are." He hadn't responded well. Not defensively exactly, just vaguely, like he thought it was an overinterpretation. Now he realized it wasn't. It was observation. And observation, when accurate, is difficult to dismiss without self-deception. He started thinking about how often he had assumed things would balance themselves out over time. That emotional inconsistency would somehow stabilize naturally. That closeness would regulate itself without him having to fully confront his discomfort. But relationships don't stabilize on their own when one person is constantly adjusting and the other is constantly recalibrating distance. That imbalance doesn't disappear. It accumulates. He began replaying moments where she had been emotionally open and he had responded with practicality instead of presence. Moments where she shared something vulnerable and he responded with solutions instead of understanding. Moments where she was reaching and he was stepping slightly away without even realizing he was doing it. And the more he replayed them, the more the pattern stopped looking accidental. It looked consistent. And that consistency made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't easily escape. Because it wasn't about one mistake. It was about rhythm. There were nights he would lie in bed and think, if I had stayed emotionally present just a little longer, would things have changed? And then another thought would follow immediately. Or was I always going to retreat once it felt too real? That second question was harder to sit with, because it suggested something deeper than circumstance. It suggested pattern, and pattern suggests identity. Not fixed identity, but behavioral tendency. Something repeated often enough to become predictable. He didn't like that idea, so he resisted it, then accepted it a little, then resisted it again. That back and forth became familiar, even internally. There was no clean conclusion forming, only fragments, small admissions scattered across time. I miss her. I heard her. I didn't know how to stay. I thought I was just overwhelmed. Maybe I was avoiding something deeper. Maybe I still am. And none of these sentences fully canceled out the others. They just coexisted, like unfinished conversations inside his head that no longer had a recipient. And in that fragmented honesty, something quietly shifted. Not resolution. Not clarity. Just awareness that the story he had been telling himself about space and timing was incomplete. Not entirely false, but incomplete enough that it changed the emotional meaning of everything that came after. He kept waiting for the moment it would feel finished. That was the assumption underneath everything. That at some point, there would be a clear emotional endpoint. A shift, a release, a moment where he could finally say, "It's done." But it never arrived. Not in any form that made sense. Instead, what he got was something much quieter. Ongoing absence that refused to resolve itself into closure. He tried to move forward in practical ways. He really did. Changed routines slightly. Stayed busier. Stopped opening certain apps as often. On the surface, it looked like progress. But internally, nothing had fully settled. It just redistributed. Some of it became memory. Some of it became habit. Some of it became silence that followed him into everyday moments without warning. There were days when he genuinely felt fine. Normal, even. He'd laugh at something at work, respond to messages, plan his evening like nothing significant was happening underneath him. And then something small would interrupt that stability. A phrase, a smell, a tone of voice that resembled hers but wasn't hers. And it would all shift slightly again. Not dramatically, just enough to remind him it was still there, still unresolved. He stopped talking about it, not because he had healed, but because he didn't know how to explain something that didn't have a clear shape anymore. It wasn't heartbreak in the way people expect. It wasn't longing in the way people romanticize. It was more like emotional residue. Something that stayed even after the main experience was gone. One evening he was walking home alone, carrying groceries in a plastic bag that kept digging into his fingers when he noticed something strange. He wasn't thinking about her, at least not consciously. His mind was occupied with small practical things: what to cook, whether he needed to reply to an email later, random fragments of the day. But then he passed a couple sitting outside a small shop laughing over something stupid and ordinary, and his body reacted before his thoughts caught up. Not sadness first. A pause. A slight tightening in the chest. Then recognition. And then the thought came, uninvited but familiar. She would have laughed at that. That was it. Nothing deeper. Just that. And somehow, that was enough to shift his entire internal state for the rest of the walk. That's what surprised him most over time. How little it took. Not big memories. Not emotional milestones. Just small reminders that arrived without permission and left without resolution. He started noticing patterns in how he remembered her. Not as a single narrative, but as fragments. Her voice saying something casually sarcastic. The way she looked when she was half-focused on something else. The habit she had of pausing before answering questions that mattered slightly more than usual. The way silence between them sometimes felt comfortable and sometimes felt like distance forming without announcement. None of it formed a clean story. Just pieces. And pieces don't end. They linger. He tried, at one point, to intellectually categorize what had happened between them, to make it simpler in his mind. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was emotional mismatch. Maybe they just processed closeness differently. And those explanations helped for a while. They created structure where there had been emotional chaos. But structure doesn't erase emotional imprint. It just organizes it. One night, much later than he expected to still be thinking about her, he found himself sitting in his apartment in complete silence. No music, no TV, no distraction. Just the sound of the refrigerator occasionally humming in the background. He had been living like that more often lately without realizing it. Not fully present, not fully distracted, just suspended somewhere in between. His phone was in his hand and locked. He didn't immediately open anything, just sat there looking at the screen. And for the first time in a long time, there wasn't urgency, not even confusion, just awareness. She was still there in his system in a way he couldn't logically undo, not as a person actively involved in his life, but as an emotional reference point his mind kept returning to when things slowed down. He thought about reaching out again, not for reconciliation, not for answers, just contact. Something simple enough not to carry emotional weight. But even that thought came with resistance now, because he understood something he hadn't fully accepted before. Any contact would not be emotionally neutral. It would reopen something that had never properly closed. And that realization didn't feel dramatic. It felt honest. There was a difference. He remembered the earlier version of himself who believed distance would create clarity, who thought time alone would simplify things internally. But clarity hadn't arrived the way he expected. Instead, time had just made the emotional landscape quieter, not resolved, just quieter, like a room after people have stopped talking but haven't left yet. There were still traces everywhere. He began to understand something uncomfortable about himself in that silence. He had not fully processed the relationship while it was happening. He had interrupted it repeatedly with withdrawal, with space, with distraction, with emotional distancing that felt like self-regulation at the time. And now the processing was happening afterward, without structure, without dialogue, without the other person present to contextualize it. Just him and memory. That combination made everything heavier than it had been originally, because there was no correction mechanism anymore, no immediate feedback, no clarification, no shared reality to stabilize interpretation, only his internal reconstruction of what had happened. And memory, when left alone too long, becomes interpretive rather than factual. He didn't trust all of his memories anymore, not because they were false, but because they were incomplete. And incomplete memory creates emotional distortion. He started noticing how often he edited the past unconsciously, sometimes making himself more reasonable than he had been, sometimes making her reactions more distant than they probably were, sometimes softening moments that actually contained tension. Not intentionally, just naturally. The mind tries to protect itself from discomfort by reshaping narratives slightly, and he could feel the happening now, which made him pause more often when remembering things, trying, in small ways, to stay closer to what actually felt emotionally true rather than what felt easier to accept. There were moments he felt regret, not dramatic regret, not self-destructive regret, more like quiet recognition that he had been emotionally inconsistent in ways he didn't fully understand at the time, and that inconsistency had consequences, not immediate ones, delayed ones. He thought about how she must have experienced it, the unpredictability, the partial presence, the moments of connection followed by emotional distance without explanation that felt satisfying or clear. And he realized something that sat with him longer than expected. From her perspective, there was no internal narrative explaining his behavior, only experience, only impact. That thought stayed with him in a way he couldn't easily dismiss, because it removed the comfort of intention. Intent mattered to him internally, but externally, only consistency mattered. And consistency was something he hadn't fully provided. Still, even with that realization, there was no dramatic emotional collapse, no sudden transformation, no clean resolution, just awareness layering itself over everything else. He still missed her, still thought about her, still felt the absence in small, ordinary moments that had nothing to do with the original relationship anymore. But now it came with something additional. Understanding that missing someone doesn't necessarily mean the situation can or should be restored. Sometimes missing is just what remains when experience has not fully closed. And he had to sit with that, not as punishment, not as lesson, just as reality. Because some connections don't end in a way that allows closure. Some end by slowly becoming internal, not resolved, just carried. And carried things don't always ask to be fixed. Sometimes they just stay with you, quietly, in the background, long after everything else has moved on.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.